Alright, this video is going to introduce us to the inner workings of a while loop, and so we're going to take a look at this. Last week all we really did was kind of show how to develop our loops, and by walking through the steps manually and so forth. And so in this case, and then all we did then is we ended up making the while statement here, and then ran it to show that it actually did print that in 2034 your balance has reached 2000. And so we saw how that worked. Now let's take a look and see how it actually worked. One of the most important things is to be able to trace your code, especially with loops, and so we want to keep track of our memory locations right here. So make sure that you should have this on your paper. On your notes you should have balance, interest, and year. We're going to take a look at that. And so we're going to trace the code at this time. So when the compiler, and just a reminder also, we're talking about investing, let's say $1,000 into an investment account. Every year it accrues interest, and that interest is based on a rate of 5%, and that interest then is going to be added on to the balance each year. And so the $1,000 grows, and it's going to grow just by itself by being in the account because of the interest that's being added to it. And so we're going to show what happens here with all that. And so so here's what happens. So here's balance. We see that the balance is 1,000 currently right now, and as always the and target is 2,000. And so as usual, the compiler, when it sees a Boolean expression, it evaluates it to be true or false. So it's looking at the condition, says it's true, so therefore it jumps into the loop, and so which is between the curly braces. And so the interest is the balance going to be times 0.05, and that's going to come up to be 50. And so interest is going to be stored in interest. So this is updated from 0 to 50. We go the next line down, and balance is going to be assigned whatever the balance plus the interest is. Well, it's 1,000 plus 50. So we can look right here. It's 1,000 plus 50 is going to be 1,050. And so that's the new balance now. And so the balance account is being updated. And then the year is going to be incremented by 1. And remember, the plus plus is an increment operator, and it adds 1 to whatever variable it's fixed to. And so this is going to be 2020 now. Okay, now we come to a very important part, and that is the ending brace of the while loop. And so while we're here, we did this in class too, let's write something down about what this while loop does, what the ending brace does. So if we go to here, the ending curly brace of a while statement says the following. So it says end of loop, return to while to check the condition. Alright, so end of loop, return to while to check the condition. And so when we're down here, what we're going to do then is we are going to go from here, and we're going to go back to while, and we're going to check that condition again. Now what happens though is the balance is now a different balance. It's, oh no, I wasn't supposed to do that. Well, let me pause this for a second. So what we see here is that the balance is 1,050 right here, and the target, of course, is always going to be 2,000. And so 1,050 is still less than 2,000. So because it's true, then the compiler jumps into the loop, and then it adds the balance, which is 1,050. Takes the balance, multiplies it by 0.05, and that ends up being 5250. or 52.5. and then the balance is going to be added to the interest to update the balance. And so as we can see here, it's going to be the 1,050 plus 52.5, and so what that ends up being is $1,102.5 or 50 cents, in other words. And then the year gets incremented as we go to the next line down. The year gets incremented to 2021. So what we can see then is that 2021, the balance has grown from $1,000 to $1,102. And so then of course we go back up to while, return to while, and check out the condition again. Well, so 1,050 no more. It's 1,102. What we should notice here, and we're actually going to kind of stop here with as far as the tracing goes, but this is how it goes through the loop. It checks the balance, or checks the condition, and if it's true, it jumps in to the loop and executes it, and if the condition is false, then it'll actually jump out of the loop, kick out, and go to pass the loop and continue on in the program if there is anything else to do. And so let's take a look at some things here then. So what are some things? Whoops, I want to do this. Okay, that didn't work. So here we are. Okay, so number one, while the condition or the Boolean expression is true, then execute the loop. Okay, which would be these three lines in this case. So while the expression is true, execute the loop. The body of the loop is the block of code, and notice that we know that a block of code is started and stopped by curly braces. And so this is our block of code, and this is the loop. It's the block of code between the curly braces. It's executed while the condition is true. So what happens then is once this becomes false, then just remember it kicks out of the loop and now goes past the loop itself. Alright, the ending curly brace we've already talked about. It tells us the end of loop, return to while, to check the condition. We've traced the balance, the interest, and the year. What do you notice then about the value of balance as it relates to the Boolean expression? The thing that we should notice here is that balance, so this is 2,000, the target. That's our target. Notice it starts out at 1,000, and so then it becomes 1,050, and then it becomes 1,102, and then it keeps getting higher and higher. In other words, it's getting closer. What do you notice about the value of balance as it relates to the Boolean expression? It's getting closer and closer to making the Boolean expression false. Alright, it's getting closer. What do you notice about the value? It's getting closer, because the number pretty soon it'll be, after a while it's going to be 1,500, and then pretty soon it's going to be 1,700, and then it's going to be 80. So notice 1,780, let's say. So it's going to get closer and closer to that 2,000. Eventually it's going to make this false, and that is significant. And the other thing is, and the reason why making it false is important is because this being false is how the loop stops. If it never becomes false, the loop will continue to go on, and it'll become what we call an infinite loop. The other question I like to ask here at this point, why does the compiler check to see if this condition is true or not? And still students are having a hard time with this, even though we've gone through this in chapter 3. But it checks to see if this is true or false to make a decision on if it's going to execute the loop or not execute the loop. So it checks to see if this is true or false, because if it's true, it's gonna execute this. If it's false, it's gonna kick out. So it's doing that to make a decision. All right, let's go on. it says here that you should have no semicolon after the condition. So we do not want to have a semicolon after the condition. That's not a good thing. And so just to demonstrate really quickly here is I have a JGrasp document here, and I put a semicolon at the end. And so if I compile it, then the compiler actually catches this right away. And so it says, okay, we've got some other issue here. I gotta check something out. I'm gonna have to pause this. Okay, now what I meant to say is that the compiler does not catch it. So you'll notice that there's no errors, and because of the semicolon. And so what happens though when you run it, that's when we find out there's an issue. So you can see I just clicked on run and absolutely nothing is going on. Well, it seems like it, but it is it's just continuing to sit here and do nothing. Well, why is that? So what happens is it says while balance is less than 1,000 less than 2,000, it says this is true, and it says okay, I'm going to execute the loop. But see, this semicolon actually is the end, so it stops and goes, okay, I'm going to return to while, and I'm going to check the condition again. Well, 1,000 is still less than 2,000. Up, stop, go back to while, check the condition, stop, go back to while, check the condition. So what it's doing, what it's creating, is what we call an empty infinite loop, and that should be in your notes. You see, you have to then do a hard shutdown, so to speak, of the program. In our case, we can just click on end, and so it says it creates an empty infinite loop, a loop that never ends. Okay, so that's going to be a problem. That is not something you typically design, so that means there's an error. Okay, another thing is that a variable declared before the loop can be called inside the loop. A variable declared in the or before the loop can be called inside the loop. So if we were to go then to here, we have interest is declared before the loop, but it's called in line 20. It's calling for its value, and so this works. This is okay. So but here's where the problem is. Variables declared inside the loop body. Variables declared inside the loop body cannot be called outside the loop. Variables declared in the loop body cannot be declared or called, outside the loop body. And so here's an example. So let's say that we do have interest, which I have interest here. It's being declared here inside. This has been commented out, so it doesn't count. So it's being declared inside. And so what happens is that the compiler then sets up or goes and reserves a memory location, one that is actually within a certain section of the computer memory, kind of with walls around it. And so so what happens is then if we then try to, let's say, print interest, the value of interest, it's not going to be able to see that variable. So the variable, let's say, interest is here, and it's trying to, but it's got a wall around it, the curly braces we'll say, and so it can't penetrate that to see, so it actually does not see that variable. And so if we were then to compile this after getting rid of that semicolon, if we were to compile it, now we're going to get an error, and the error says that in line 22 that they can't find symbol. They can't find, and it has the caret going right here, interest, and that's why that's the case. So make sure, you got to be careful. You can declare a variable inside this loop body as long as you're not calling it outside of the loop body. Alright, so let's move on and go to here. Vocabulary. Now if you're struggling in this class, I would suggest now that you get your Quizlet out and start making Quizlets, especially on the vocabulary and even on some other stuff that's on here that might be a good flashcard material. But vocabulary. This is a pretest loop. It means it's tested pre-loop. It's tested before the loop. The condition is tested or checked before the loop body. And so where is that? Well, here's the check, and here's the loop body. So it's being checked beforehand, so it can see if it should execute or the loop body or not. It's also called an event-controlled loop. If there's an event, that's going to control the loop. The loop will be stopped. The reason why it's called an event-controlled loop, because the loop will be stopped by a certain event. Alright, and so what is that event? Well, the event is the balance becomes greater than or equal to target. So here is the event. So if at some point then this becomes 2,000, let's say 100, and that's not less than 2,000, well, that's the event that will stop the loop and it'll kick out. So it's controlling the loop by that event. The programmer, so we go down here, the indefinite loop. Well, why is it called indefinite? Definite means a certain or predetermined number, and so but the programmer does not predetermine. The programmer does not predetermine how many times the loop will be executed. It doesn't say, okay, we're going to execute this loop 16 times or 12 times or whatever. The compiler, the programmer here does not know when the value of balance will reach the value of target. The programmer does not know when that's going to happen. So it doesn't, he or she does not determine how many times this is going to be executed. So it's called indefinite. Iteration is one execution of the loop body. Iteration is one execution of the loop body. So if this loop were to iterate 5 times, that means that it is executed 5 times if there's 5 iterations. In this situation, the ending response, the correct answer to this, is in the year 2034 is when the balance reaches the target. Well, so that means it's going to go through 15 iterations before it's stopped. To increment a variable, and so what you can do in here is you could type something like num plus plus to increment a variable and then a semicolon. So this is incrementing the variable, and it just all it means is to add 1 to its value. And of course decrement is just the opposite, and so you can go num minus minus semicolon, and that means to subtract 1 from its value. The next thing that now that we've been through to see how a compiler operates, now what you need to do is go to page 2 and start to trace this code. There's 5 pieces of code. Now I'm going to get you started on number 1, and then the rest of it you're going to have to see from in class. But what happens is then we should have a variable memory location that is I, and you should have a memory location sum, and sum is, whoops, that's not right, and sum is 0 and I is 0. So what does the compiler do? And by the way, before I forget, is that there's a couple in these 5, there's a couple of them that are going to have an error or bad output, or there's going to be a problem, and you'll catch that problem if you trace the code correctly. And so at that point you would just stop and then write down what the problem is. And so in here it says while the sum, which is 0, is less than 10, which it is, then it's going to go and jump in the loop. So the I plus plus, it means this gets incremented by 1. And then sum is assigned whatever sum plus 1 is. Well, that's 0 plus 1, so that's 1. And then the output is, it says to print the value of I and then a space and the value of sum. So it goes 1 space 1. End of loop, return to while to check the condition. And now sum is 1, and 1 is less than 10, so it jumps into the loop. And I plus plus gets, that means it gets incremented to 2. And so now the sum is assigned the value of sum plus the value of I. So it's going to, so 3 is going to be stored inside sum, so that gets updated. And now we're going to print the 2 space 3. So their output's looking like this. Return to while, check out the condition. Well, now the sum is 3, and 3 is less than 10, so we're going to do the loop again. We're going to iterate again. And so I plus plus, so now I becomes 3. The sum is currently 3, and the I is now 3, so you add those together and you get 6. Now notice we added 0 plus 1, 1 plus 2 to get 3, 0 plus 1 to get 1, and now we're adding 3 plus 3 to get 6. So if you ever see a pattern going on, then you can actually kind of just go through that and make sure that you're going in the right direction here. But what we can do, we're just adding 1 to each of these, so this is 4, and then we're going to add the 4 plus the 6 to get 10. Alright, so we know that we're going to print the 3 and the 6. I'm sorry, the 3 and the 3 and the 6, yes. And then we're going to print the 4 and the 10. So after it prints the 4 and the 10, it's going to return to while and check this out. Now, is 10 less than 10? No, it's not. So it stops the loop, it kicks out, and there's nothing left. So this is the output. And your tracing of your memory location should look like this. So do this for the rest of these, and remember that there's a couple that are going to have errors of some kind, and so once you figure that out, then you would just stop tracing and say, okay, this is the problem. Alright, so that's it for what we did in class today.